I think I'm alright. Barry Butters does. James Bond, you only live twice. Got a backache now, and the car's a bloody write-off. Anyway, let's get down to business. One of the first and most obvious things to say about You Only Live Twice is that the film was made at a time where there was a growing interest in space exploration. Yuri Gagarin became the first human being to leave the Earth's atmosphere in 1961. And then you had the moon landing in 1969.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
I think the most obvious indication of this growing interest is found in the popularity of Star Trek, which came out in 1966. Watching Star Trek now is a bit like recollecting a strange dream, where you wake up and come to your senses and think, what the hell was all that about? The two main characters, Kirk and Spock, loved each other so much they were almost like a married couple.
Has it occurred to you that there's a certain inefficiency in constantly questioning me on things you've already made up your mind about?
It gives me emotional security.
But most of their time was taken up with exploring the galaxy and fighting aliens. But when it came down to it, the real subject of Star Trek was much closer to home. It turns out that exploring space and meeting aliens was actually a way to understand ourselves.
We're a killer species. It's instinctive. It's the same with you. Your General Order 24.
It's instinctive. The instinct can be fought. We're human beings with the blood of a million savage years on our hands. But we can stop it.
But then sometimes it was just plain weird.
How can you let this go on?
You Only Live Twice came out in 1967, and that's 1 year after Star Trek. The thing is, space weren't in the novel at all, so this is just something that they added to the film. So I think we can interpret this as a kind of strategic move to capitalise on a popular trend. It's also worth mentioning here that only 1 year later, 2001 came out. 2001 is one of the most influential films ever made. It was the first realistic depiction of space, and it contains a deep exploration of themes that are still with us today, such as the progress of technology and the impact of artificial intelligence, as well as the future of humanity itself. But all that was just to provide you with some context by saying that the first location is space itself. Then we go to Russia for the summit, and then we go to Hong Kong for James Bond's funeral, and after his resurrection, Bond appears in Japan in Tokyo. Then later, Bond goes to Kyoto by helicopter. Now you can see a Japanese castle. But Bond also goes to a Japanese island and a volcano where the enemy base is hidden. You've got a range of suits again, not so many this time. You got Bond in a naval uniform, then he wears a grey suit, a blue suit. This is the first Bond film where we don't see Bond in a dinner jacket, but instead we do get to see Bond in a range of Japanese costumes. He even dresses up as a Japanese fisherman at one point, then he's a ninja, then he's a spaceman. And Bond's got his trusty PPK again. And in terms of your gadgets, this time you've got a gyrocopter, what's called Little Nelly. But it's basically like an aerial version of the Aston Martin from Goldfinger. You've got machine guns. You've got rocket launchers. You've got heat-seeking air-to-air missiles. You've got flame guns at the back. And you've also got smoke ejectors. Then you've got aerial mines. It's worth pointing out that this is actually a real invention, and the inventor of this gyrocopter was a bloke called Ken Wallace.
When I landed, Cubby Broccoli said, yes, he said, we shall want it in Japan in 6 weeks' time.
Then you've got your beautiful girls again. You've got a beautiful Chinese girl and two beautiful Japanese girls. You've got Aki and Kissy. You got a sexy redhead on a telephone. Then you've got Bond as a symbol of good and Blofeld as a symbol of evil. In the last review we pointed out that Thunderball was the first James Bond film to have real stunts, but You Only Live Twice goes in for this in a much bigger way. You've got spaceships swallowing shuttles. You've got crash landings. You've got metallic slides that lead to secret underground offices. You've got falling from great heights. You've even got cars falling from great heights, suspended by giant magnets. And last but not least, you've even got ninjas abseiling into enemy bases what are hidden under volcanoes. And in terms of supporting characters, you've got Bond with Moneypenny again, and they've got the same flirtatious relationship.
Miss Moneypenny, give 007 the password we've agreed with Japanese SIS.
Yes, sir. We tried to think of something that you wouldn't forget.
Yes.
I love you. Repeat it, please, to make sure you get it.
Don't worry. I get it.
And you got the same sort of relationship between Bond and M again, where Bond is very polite and deferential around his superiors.
This is the big one, 007. That's why I'm out here myself. I take it you're fully briefed.
Oh, yes, sir. But there's one thing I don't understand. If our Singapore tracking station is correct about the rocket not landing in Russia, then where did it land?
We assume it's Japan.
But again, Bond is a bit cheeky and insubordinate around Q.
Welcome to Japan, Dad. Is my little girl hot and ready?
Look, 007, I've had a long and tiring journey, probably to no purpose, and I'm in no mood for your juvenile quips.
You ain't got Felix Leiter this time around. Instead, you got this bloke called Dicko Henderson. Now, in the novel, he's an Australian intelligence officer. But in the film, they change him to this British bloke who's an MI6 operative.
Do come in.
Mr. Henderson?
At your service.
But Bond's main contact in Japan is this bloke called Tiger Tanaka.
My name is Tanaka. Please call me Tiger.
If you're Tanaka, how do you feel about me?
I love you.
I'm glad we got that out of the way.
And then you got the Bond girl, the ludicrously named Kissy Suzuki.
That is your bed. I shall sleep over there.
We're supposed to be married.
Think again, please. You gave false name to priest.
Yes, but we must keep up appearances. We're on our honeymoon.
No honeymoon. This is business.
Well, I won't need these.
And in terms of set pieces, we've got all the usual suspects. You got an exciting, fast-paced car chase on the streets of Tokyo. You got a fist fight again. Like the bloke from Goldfinger, this bloke was another professional wrestler. And you got your gunfights again, but this time there's a nice little Japanese twist. And this film's got more explosions than we've ever seen before. And last but not least, we got a nice little sex scene.
Tiger said, "From now on, you must do everything in Japanese style."
Everything? Good for Tiger. Ninjas, 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 ninjas.
Sorry about that. I think I need a little break. How about a nice little custard cream?
Anybody want a dainty custard cream? Yes. Thank you, Lewis.
Can I have one? I don't know what to do with this now. I've got it.
Oh, I think I'll have another one of these. Right, where were we? You Only Live Twice starts with the best pre-credit sequence we've seen so far. We open with the first space scene in a James Bond film. The control tower sees this unidentified object on their radar, and it turns out to be a spaceship, and that spaceship then swallows the shuttle. The next scene of the opening sequence then shows a diplomatic crisis. America blames Russia for the event, and they say any further interference will be interpreted as an act of war. But the UK is also present at this summit, and the British diplomat says he's not convinced the attack came from Russia. He tells them that they monitored this mysterious rocket landing somewhere in the Sea of Japan. We then cut to Bond, who's in bed snogging this Chinese girl. But this girl then betrays him. She flips the bed up so he gets stuck. And then these other blokes rush in and machine gun him. So the film begins with the apparent assassination of Bond. After the credits, of course, this is all revealed to be a mock assassination, and the girl was actually in on the job. After the title sequence, we then get James Bond's funeral and his burial at sea. James Bond is then recovered by divers in the sea, and he's taken to a submarine. Bond is then sent to Tokyo, where he meets this girl called Aki, who then takes him to Dicko Henderson. Dicko knows about the rogue spacecraft, but he's killed before he can tell Bond about the details. After that, Bond kills the assassin and he puts on a disguise. He's taken away in the getaway car and he arrives at a site of chemicals. At this point, Bond manages to subdue the driver and he breaks into a safe that contains some secret documents. So in time-honoured fashion, let's go and have a look at some pictures to make all this a bit clearer. Here you can see Hong Kong, and there you can see the headline reporting the death of James Bond. Then we have the funeral, and it's a burial at sea. But then two divers pick out the body, and they take it to this submarine. Inside the submarine, Bond is revived. M then tells Bond to go to Tokyo and meet his contact there, this bloke called Henderson. Bond then leaves the submarine and he lands on the coast of Japan. And Bond goes and attends a sumo wrestling match. And there he meets this girl called Aki. She then invites him to meet Henderson, who's staying at a hotel, and he's a British intelligence officer who's based in Japan. They have a bit of a chinwag, and Henderson is about to tell Bond what's going on, but then he gets this funny expression on his face, and Bond realises he's been murdered. He got a dagger in the back. Bond then runs after the assassin and he manages to kill him. He then impersonates him by putting on his clothes, and he climbs into the back of the getaway car. And the driver takes him to a site of chemicals, but then a fight ensues once Bond's identity is discovered. But Bond manages to win the fight, and then he cracks the safe that he finds inside the office. Aki then picks up Bond as he's making his escape from the office. But then when he follows her into this building, he falls through the floor and he arrives in this underground lair. But this is actually the secret office of Tiger Tanaka. And this bloke is the head of the Japanese Secret Service. Bond then shows Tanaka the papers he stole from the safe, and it turns out to be an inventory list, and one of the items is rocket fuel. Bond is then taken to Tiger's private underground train. Aboard the train they enlarge a photograph that was attached to the papers that Bond retrieved from the safe. It shows this ship called a Ningpo, and then Bond asks Tiger to identify the coastline. In Act 2, Bond goes back to a site of chemicals in the day and he impersonates this buyer called Mr. Fisher. Asato pretends like he don't know what's going on, but then when Bond leaves, he orders his assistant, Helga Braun, to have Bond killed. Then outside the building, some assassins open fire on Bond, but Aki rescues Bond. Bond and Aki then drive to Kobe, where Tiger Tanaka has told them the Ningpo is docked. When they arrive on site, they investigate and they discover the ship was delivering rocket fuel. But then Bond is captured and he's taken on board the ship, where he's interrogated by Helga. Here you can see Asato and Helga meeting James Bond in Asato's office. Then during their meeting, Asato humours Bond, but he has this X-ray on his desk and he sees that Bond has got this pistol, the old Walter PPK. Then when Bond leaves, Asato tells Helga to have him assassinated. Then outside, these blokes open fire on Bond. But Aki comes to his rescue and they drive away in her car. Then Bond and Aki go and explore the docks and they find the rocket fuel. But then Bond has a fight with the dock workers and they knock him unconscious. And Asato turns up. And then Bond is interrogated. Helga seems like she's a bit mean at first, But then she starts to warm to him and things get a bit sexy. Then the next day, Helga's taking Bond to Tokyo on this jet. But it all turned out to be a trick. And this board comes out and he can't move his hands. So he's stuck in the back of this plane. Then she jumps out to safety and he's stuck, look at that. But then he wriggles about and he manages to get his right hand free. And he does a nice little karate chop through the plank. And then he's able to crash land the plane. And that closes out Act 2, you see. In Act 3, Bond explores the island with his gyrocopter. This is where the Ningpo unloaded its cargo. But then Bond is attacked by 4 helicopters. After this exciting dogfight, we then see a Soviet spacecraft being stolen. And we watch it land inside the secret base inside a volcano. Inside the volcano, we see Blofeld attending to business. He blames Brandt for letting Bond escape. And he kills her by dropping her in this pool that's filled with piranhas. Blofeld then orders Osato to finish the job. Bond then arrives in Kyoto. Bond trains with Tanaka's ninjas and puts on a Japanese disguise. Towards the end of Act 3, the assassination attempts on Bond fail. After all that, Bond is introduced to this girl called Kissy Suzuki, who pretends to be his wife, so that he can have a cover story when he goes to the island of Matsu. Here you can see Bond exploring the island in his gyrocopter, Little Nelly, and there he spots the volcano, but it looks pretty normal. He even flies right over it. But then 4 helicopters arrive to intercept Bond, and there's this dogfight. It's pretty great actually. And then it's the Russians' turn to have one of their space shuttles stolen. So we get another space sequence. Here you can see the Russian shuttle being stolen. But it goes on a bit longer, this sequence, than the first one. And we see the rocket being taken to this underground base. It's hidden underneath a volcano. This is a very long but extremely well done sequence. It's also the most elaborate enemy base and set design that we've seen in a James Bond film so far. This is where we see that Osato and Helga actually work for Spectre and they're talking to Blofeld. And Blofeld kills Helga because of her failure to assassinate Bond. And he dumps her in this pool that's filled with piranhas. She's being eaten alive. Bloody hell. He then tells Osato to finish the job. Then Bond arrives in Kyoto by helicopter. And he meets Tiger and Aki again. Tiger informs Bond that he will marry an Amma girl as part of his cover on the island. At this point, Bond is disguised as a Japanese bloke. Whereas Thunderball had quite a lot of silly moments, You Only Live Twice only really has one, but it is very, very silly. It's lifted from the novel in fact, and I'm surprised they didn't leave it out. But have a look at this.
Kenuki. Eyepieces to Hera.
Eyepieces to Hera.
Katsura.
Katsura.
Senryo.
Senryo.
Why don't you just dye the parts that show?
私たちだけの秘密よ。
They actually made fun of this scene in Team America.
I don't look Middle Eastern.
Leave that to us.
Sarah is a professional at skin grafting and laser valmorification.
Just try to be still.
Amazing!
The valmorification completely worked.
Sit up and take a look, Gary.
It's uncanny.
You're going to fool everyone, Gary. Or should I say, Ahmed.
But anyway, let's get back to the plot summary. In the last meeting we saw Blofeld tell Losato to kill Bond, so the assassins that arrive at the training camp are sent by Osato. The first attempt is made by trying to poison Bond from the rafters when he's asleep, but this has the effect of killing Aki by accident. And then there's a second attempt that's made during a training session, but Bond manages to kill this assassin with this stave. But Bond quickly moves on from the death of Aki, and he marries this Hammer girl called Kissy Suzuki. This is all part of his cover so that he can have a look around the island without arousing suspicion, you see. In the final act of the movie, Bond and Kissy explore the island and they find a volcano. On closer inspection they discover the secret base. At this point, Bond slips in while Kissy goes to alert Tanaka to get reinforcements. Bond is then taken into the control room and he comes face to face with Blofeld. Meanwhile, another American space shuttle is about to be stolen and the Americans are about to launch a nuclear attack on Russia. Then we're back on Earth again and Tanaka's ninjas infiltrate the base, and then Bond self-destructs the rocket before it can intercept the American shuttle. The old base is then destroyed and Bond and Kissy escape to safety. Here you can see Bond and Kissy approaching the island by boat, and there's the volcano in the distance. Then by the night time they arrive at the bottom of the crater and they see the water is actually a retractable roof and they see inside the base. Then Bond tells Kissy to go and get reinforcements and she runs off to get Tanaka. Bond then puts on his ninja suit and goes inside the base. But once Bond is inside sneaking about, Blofeld actually spots Bond and he's captured. Once Bond is captured, Blofeld reveals his plans. He hopes to cause a nuclear war between America and Russia. And once they've killed each other off, Spectre will rise as a new power to dominate the world. And this is the first time in the Bond films where we get to see Blofeld's face.
Allow me to introduce myself. I am Ernst Stavro Blofeld.
But anyway, let's get back to the plot summary. Here you can see Spectre's rocket launching from the secret underground base. There it goes, launching off into space. There's Tanaka and Kissy approaching the volcano. And Tanaka's men, his ninjas. Then they abseil down to the base. Here's the rocket about to capture the American shuttle. Here you can see Bond in the control room and he's trying to detonate the rocket before it intercepts the American shuttle. Then he presses the red button and it blows up in space and the shuttle is saved. And Bond looks really pleased with himself. Then the base explodes after Blofeld presses the self-destruct button. But Tanaka and his men escape to safety on these rubber dinghies. Then Bond and Kissy watch the base explode from the sea, and look at that, the volcano explodes. Then it's daylight, and then Bond and Kissy have a bit of a kiss and a cuddle, and that brings the movie to an end. You gotta love the Japanese, really. They're just so adorable.
I have a bad case of diarrhea. I have a bad case of diarrhea. I have a bad case of diarrhea. I have a bad case of diarrhea.
Mind you, they're not all as nice as these young ladies. After all, I was once a Japanese prisoner of war. And this cruel, dirty bastard called General Yamato did lots of strange experiments on me. I still have trouble sitting down, even to this day. You Only Live Twice follows the example of Thunderball, in introducing extra Bond girls that aren't in the novel. Here you can see Roald Dahl, the screenwriter, talking about the instruction he received from the producers.
He wants a woman, doesn't he, to chase around and fall in love with. And they said, well, 3 would be better.
The thing is, there's only one girl in the novel, and that's Kissy Suzuki. But Roald Dahl added this girl called Aki, who works for Japanese intelligence. And he also added this girl called Elga Grant, who works for Spectre. She's a fiery redhead, this one, a bit like the girl from Thunderbolt. But there's a sort of odd split between Aki and Kissy in the film. Because the thing is, although Kissy is the main Bond girl, I've got to say that Aki is much more charismatic. She has a certain warmth, you see, and she's sort of interesting and mysterious.
I love you.
I have a car nearby.
Oh, where do you suggest we go?
I know a quiet hotel.
And?
Where your friend is waiting. Mr. Henderson.
And she's also quite good at conveying her affection and fondness for Bond.
Get out of here. Contact Tanaka.
I'm not leaving you.
And there's a nice little scene where she shows her disappointment at not being married to him.
Now what's the plan for me?
First, you become a Japanese. Second, you train hard and quickly to become a ninja, like us. And third, to give you extra special cover, you take a wife. Regretfully impossible. You must marry Amagel, one who is known on the island.
But then 2/3 of the way into the film, she dies and we're just left with Kissy. The thing is, she's just a bit, well, she's a bit odd. And some of her lines fall a bit flat.
This is my house. My friend has made us some food.
Do you live here alone?
Yes. My parents are dead.
They do have some good ideas at first about Kissy's character. There's a funny scene, for example, where she's not too keen in going to bed with Bond. And this is the scene I showed you near the start of the review.
That is your bed. I shall sleep over there.
We're supposed to be married.
Think again, please. You gave false name to priest.
Yes, but we must keep up appearances. We're on our honeymoon.
No honeymoon. This is business.
But then for some reason that isn't really explained, she eventually warms to Bond. In the novel, Kissy Suzuki is basically like a Japanese version of Honey Rider. She's fun-loving and straightforward and tough, but her character in the film is not really fleshed out very well. It's very much like Dr. No and Honey Rider, where they make the female lead much more two-dimensional. There is one behind-the-scenes point that's very relevant to all of this, because they explain how the actress who played Aki was very good at learning English, whereas the actress who played Kissy weren't really up to snuff. And it does sort of explain the strangeness of her performance.
Akiko Wakabayashi was very good. She really learned very, very fast.
I think I will enjoy very much serving under you.
The other girl, Mia, tried desperately hard, and I saw Tamba and I said, look, Tamba, this is a big problem to us. It's no good for her and it's no good for us. Will you take her out to dinner and tell her that she has to go back to Japan? He looked a bit glum and he said, well, I'll try. And he took her out that night, and the next morning he came in and I said, well, Tamba, how did it go? He said, tonight she commits suicide. She will jump out of the window at the Dorchester.
Lewis said, you know, he did literally go cold at that point.
So, of course, I rushed to Harry and rushed to Cubby and said, my God, we've got a problem here. Cubby said, you know, I don't think she'll be so bad in the film, which we all agreed very quickly that she wouldn't be so bad in the film.
The other thing to say is that Elga Grant is pretty good, the femme fatale, but she does seem like a bit of a repetition of the girl from Thunderball, so it don't really seem very original. So overall, I'd say the treatment of the Bond girl in You Only Live Twice is a bit uneven, but Aki is a very solid character and she really stands out. And it's a bit of a shame she weren't the main Bond girl in my opinion. You Only Live Twice represents a far greater deviation from the source material than we've seen so far. In fact, the film is so different that I don't think it can even be described as an adaptation at all. It's more as if the novel is just a source of inspiration for the film, on which it's very loosely based. Basically, the novel is just a very simple revenge plot, and it all revolves around the idea of Blofeld running a secret underground death cult for the Japanese so that they can commit suicide. It has nothing to do with space, and Bond just agrees to help Tanaka with this problem in order to get Japanese intel. So in terms of the film, they get rid of the simple story of revenge and it becomes a story about international affairs, which involves space shuttles and the threat of nuclear war. So this is what would have happened in the film if they'd followed the plot of the novel. So following the events of the previous novel on Her Majesty's Secret Service, Bond is suffering from trauma after the death of his wife at the hand of Blofeld. M talks to a neurologist who advises him to send Bond on a mission that will function as a cure. But M also wants Japanese intel. So basically the plot consists of M sending Bond to Japan to get the intel, while also trying to get Bond to focus more on his job after all his recent troubles. So like the film, Bond meets this bloke called Dicko Henderson in Japan, and in the novel it's Dicko Henderson that puts Bond in contact with Tiger Tanaka. And then Tanaka promises Bond intel if he helps him out with a problem of his own, and this concerns a strange foreigner who has recently arrived in Japan, called Dr. Shatterhand, and he's providing the Japanese with a means to commit suicide. At this point in the story in the novel, Tiger Tanaka introduces Bond to various elements of Japanese culture. So this is one element of the novel that's a bit similar to the film, although in the novel they go into a lot more detail. Bond is trained as a ninja and he's provided with cover by marrying an Amma girl, and that's Kissy Suzuki. After all the preparation is finished, Bond then investigates Dr. Shatterhand's castle, and he finds out that Dr. Shatterhand is actually Blofeld, and then at this point Bond kills Blofeld by stabbing him with a stave. But after killing Blofeld in the novel, Bond falls into the sea, and he's presumed dead by M and all the officials in London, but actually he's rescued by Kissy Suzuki, and she nurses him back to health, and then after that he gets her pregnant, and at that point the novel ends. In addition to all of those differences, there are lots of things that aren't in the novel at all. There's no space, for example, and there's no gyrocopter, there's no Elga, and there ain't no Aki neither. So in short, it's completely different. And although both the novel and the film are set in Japan, the film changes the idea behind Blofeld's base. In the novel, you see, Blofeld lives in a castle by the sea. But when the filmmakers were scouting for locations in Japan, they found that the Japanese had never built any castles by the sea.
We covered literally 2/3 of Japan in about 3 weeks, flying 7 hours every day.
We flew all over Japan looking for a castle that was on the sea, And apparently they never built castles anywhere near the sea.
It was quite a strenuous experience until we found this unbelievable volcanic area on Kyushu, and flying over this area was really dramatic. We decided that it would be interesting to have the villain live in one of these extinct craters.
It wasn't really water, but was something that could pull back. And, well, Ken Adam, of course, absolutely loved that. I mean, he went crazy as soon as the idea was mooted.
And the film also gets rid of some strange elements from the novel. There are, for example, episodes in the novel where James Bond slaps a cow, looks at porn, struggles with impotence, and then gets Kissy pregnant. One of the weirdest episodes in the novel can be found on page 132, and this is part of Bond's initiation into Japanese culture. So Tiger takes Bond to visit some of these cows, and it goes on the bottom of page 132, the herdsman hauled out a crate of beer bottles. He opened one and handed it to Bond. Tiger said peremptorily, "Give it to the cow to drink." And it goes over the page. Bond took the bottle and walked boldly up to the cow, who raised her head and opened her slavering jaws. Bond thrust the bottle between them and poured. The cow almost ate the bottle in its delight, and ran its harsh tongue gratefully over Bond's hand. Bond stood his ground. He was getting used to Tiger's ploys by now, and he was determined to show at any rate an approximation of the kamikaze spirit, whatever tests Tiger put him to. The herdsman now handed Bond a bottle of what appeared to be water. Tiger said, "This is sochu. It is a very raw gin. Fill your mouth with it and spray it over the back of the cow, and then massage it into the cow's flesh." It's only once you get to page 134 that they reveal that this is all in aid of producing Kobe beef. So then on page 134, Bond says to Tiger, "What was that all about?" Tiger looked pleased with himself. You were about to eat what it was all about. The finest, most succulent beef in the world. Then on page 149, Tiger tells Bond about sumo wrestling. And he goes, "Well, the sumo wrestler would have been selected for his profession by the time of puberty. Perhaps because of his weight and strength, or perhaps because he comes with a sumo family. Well, by assiduously massaging those parts, he is able, after much practice, to cause the testicles to re-enter the body up the inguinal canal, down which they originally descended." "My God, you Japanese," said Bond with admiration. On page 281 we see Bond in the care of a Japanese doctor, and it goes, "The doctor was surprised by Bond's lack of progress and resigned himself to the conclusion that Bond's amnesia was total. But soon there was no cause for further visits because Bond's physical health and his apparently complete satisfaction with his lot showed that in every other respect he was totally recovered. But there was one thing that greatly distressed Kissy. From the first night in the cave she had shared Bond's futon, and when he was well and back in the house she waited every night for him to make love to her. But while he kissed her occasionally and often held her hand, his body seemed totally unaware of her, however much she pressed herself against him, and even caressed him with her hands. But after the doctor's unable to help her, Kissy decides to visit a sex merchant. In this sex shop she obtains a potion to boost Bond's libido. He reached for an iron teaspoon and with a small file gently raised the wire cage and very carefully scraped the sweat beads off the toad's body and dripped the result into the file. He corked it up and handed it to Kissy, who held it with reverence and great care as if it had been a fabulous jewel. And then if you look over the page on page 284, the sex merchant also gives Kissy some pornography. The sex merchant went back to his cupboard and produced a cheaply bound and printed paper book with a plain cover. Kissy opened it. Her hand went to her mouth and she blushed furiously. But then, being a careful girl who didn't want to be cheated, she turned some more of the pages. They all contained outrageously pornographic close-up pictures. And if you go to page 286, this is after Bond has been given the cure and he's also had a chance to look at some porn. And it goes, Bond threw off his kimono. He pointed to the soft futon on the floor. He said fiercely, "Kissy, take off your clothes and lie down there. We'll start at page 1. But we then immediately learn that Kissy is also pregnant. So it goes, on the same page, Kissy wondered what moment to choose to tell Bond that she was going to have a baby, and whether he would then propose marriage to her. After all his sexual encounters, I was starting to wonder whether James Bond might never get anyone pregnant. But this novel finally proves that James Bond wasn't shooting blanks after all. I think you should also be aware that they got a new director again this time. Lewis Gilbert, this bloke. Here you can hear him say how nervous he was about taking on the challenge of directing a Bond film.
Well, I was a bit dubious at first, you know. I mean, one's always dubious of producers. I mean, usually one feels they're like tax, you know, it's a sort of necessary evil. Yeah. But I must say that in this case, the two of them, they've been wonderful.
And here you can see him directing.
And when the coffin goes by, Sean, you give a little bow, and now looking at Tamba, there. Eventually the procession has gone by, and you turn, and you walk up the street. Both together? Both, yeah. As I turn him, she'll come into picture, and he'll walk down the street, and he gives a little glance back at Tamba somewhere. Yeah.
Then in terms of shooting the film, the most challenging aspect was to do with the underground volcano base. So first of all, they shot a load of footage around the volcano, on location in Japan. But then for the underground base, they actually built this massive set back in Pinewood Studios in London. And you can hear from Ken Adam, the production designer, talking about the design of the set.
It was probably the most ambitious project of interior-exteriors had ever undertaken.
But despite all these difficulties, at least he had Sean Connery around to lift everyone's mood. He really enjoyed clowning around, this bloke. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. Prior to filming, Sean Connery announced to the world that this would be his last James Bond, and the press went completely crazy. Here you can see Albert Broccoli, one of the producers, talking about Sean Connery and what they're going to do with Bond after he leaves.
It won't be the last one, under any circumstances. All due respect to Sean, who I think has been certainly the best one to play this part.
He looks a bit worried, doesn't he? You Only Live Twice intensifies that aspect of the Bond movies that started with Goldfinger towards the franchise becoming more action orientated. And it's a particularly good adaptation, although it is the biggest departure from the source material that we've come across so far. I think most of this has to do with the ingenuity and the brilliance of Roald Dahl. I think it's a complete reversal of the previous film. Whereas Thunderball is a weak adaptation of a strong novel, You Only Live Twice is a strong adaptation of one of the weakest Bond novels. And the film gets rid of some of the more silly elements of the novel, except the Japanese disguise of course. It's also a much more light-hearted affair than some of the earlier Bond films, like From Russia with Love for example. Following on from the example of Goldfinger, there's more of an emphasis on stunts and spectacle. This does come at the expense of deeper characterisation, but again it's all carried off with a great confidence and flair. So I think we can regard You Only Live Twice as a return to form after the slight misstep of Thunderball. And in this sense it reveals a broader point about the Bond franchise in general, because just when you've written it off it sort of rises from the ashes. And this same pattern will be repeated multiple times as we look at the various Bond films over the years. Because to be honest with you, there are some really terrible Bond films, and that can sometimes make you feel like you're never going to see a good Bond film again. But then the next film, or maybe the one after that, completely reverses this judgment. Because the thing is, although the Bond films are quite formulaic, there are so many different ways of combining the various ingredients. Sometimes this results in an experiment that goes wrong, but sometimes the same ingredients combine and they create something rather delicious. I'd say that You Only Live Twice only really has two weaknesses. First of all, the Bond girl is a bit flat and two-dimensional, which is a consequence of the movie going more in an action direction and less of a thriller direction. And then the other weakness is the silliness of the Japanese disguise, which I think they should have left out of the movie entirely. But more generally, You Only Live Twice represents a return to form and is another very solid adaptation. In fact, it's more than an adaptation, it's a reinvention of the source material, which mostly has to do with the writing talent of the screenwriter, Roald Dahl. It's not the most sophisticated and brilliant Bond film, but it's bloody good fun, and in my opinion it's one of those films that stands the test of time. So it gets a pretty big thumbs up, this one, and 8 out of 10 ain't bad, is it? But that's pretty much all I've got to say about this one, so I guess that wraps it up. That's 5 down and 20 to go. So Barry Butters signing out. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Can you make it bigger?
Yes.